Good morning, Brookfield Zoo fans joining us, and welcome to this edition of Bringing the Zoo to You. My name is Tim Sullivan. I'll be hosting this particular segment, which is really cool because we're here at our tortoise habitat where we have two species of tortoise that I want to talk to you about, and they're one of my favorite reptiles. They're just so cool, have so many amazing adaptations, but just in general, they're just fun to look at. They're just very cool creatures. So as I mentioned, we have two species here, and we have both the Galapagos tortoise, which I'll talk about first, is here. They're the darker colored animals with this dome shell. And if you look in the background, we have the kind of tan or brown colored tortoise, which are the African Spur-Thighed or sulcata tortoise. And they are, of course, from Africa.
What's this blue tortoise over here?
Yeah, blue tortoise is trying to steal some of our browse here. That's, of course, a peacock. And then actually a young male, too. So he's just learning about this and has no fear of our tortoise, and the tortoise have no fear of them. So we talk about tortoise. They are reptiles, of course, and they are ectotherms, like most in all reptiles, actually. So they get all their heat from the environment around them. It's a cold day here at Brookfield Zoo. I think it's still in maybe the low 60s. And so because of that, the tortoise will be a lot slower. They have really slow metabolisms to start with, but on cooler days, they will typically wake up in the morning. When the sun pops out, they'll bask in that sun for up to 2 hours to warm up their bodies. And once they get their metabolism going, then they'll go out and forage for 9 or so hours out there. So let's start with the Galapagos tortoise. And of course, they're named after the islands of the Galapagos, which are off the coast of Ecuador in the Pacific Ocean. And you may not know that Galapagos, the names of those islands or that archipelago, is Spanish for tortoise. And that's because when the explorers went there, all the sailors stopped at these islands, they were covered with these giant tortoises. And at the time, there was about 250,000 of them, so it was really overwhelming. Not to mention, it was the biggest tortoises they've ever seen, because the Galapagos tortoise is the largest tortoise living, and is just impressive. They can get up to be 5 feet long, and on an average, over 400 pounds. But there are specimens that have reached 6 feet in length and been over 600 pounds, so they are giant. Whoa. But as I mentioned, they are slow to develop, so the animals we have here are really young. They can live over 100 years, and we've had wild specimens that are known to be over 125 years old, and Galapagos tortoises that are in human care have lived up to 175 years old, so they're very long-lived. And they get all that size and all their food by eating plant matter. They're herbivores.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, they're like, oh no. So they eat, on the islands of the Galapagos, which are somewhat dry, they eat plant material like cactus and flowers and shoots that they can catch. And that's why they don't have to be very fast, because their food doesn't move, and so they can go out there and eat all day long. And you might notice that I mentioned there were up to 15 different species of Galapagos tortoise. So they call it the Galapagos tortoise complex. So a group of species that all live in the islands. And they inhabit or are native to 7 of the Galapagos islands. And they are oftentimes very different in their shape. There are 2 basic shapes of their carapace, which is the top part of their shell. One is this dome shape here, and the other one is more saddle-shaped, and they believe that is an adaptation for the species that live up in the upper altitudes of some of the higher Galapagos islands. And they think maybe that because the part of their shell in the front, where their neck is, allows them to reach higher up to get some kind of browsing from bushes, which is a great adaptation. The shell for tortoises aren't necessarily to protect them, because Galapagos tortoises have no natural predators. Unfortunately, though, when sailors visited the islands, they thought this would be a great food source, these big animals, so they were hunting them almost to extinction. Again, when Darwin arrived in 1835, he noted 14 to 15 species. Now there's only 12 remaining. But there was some great news yesterday. I don't know if you saw, but they found a species of Galapagos tortoise they thought had been extinct for over 100 years.
Really?
But with genetic testing, they found out it's a another species that's out there So the hope is that there are more out there they just haven't found yet, so that's good news. Unfortunately, because of hunting, both by humans and also the introduction of dogs and feral pigs who are eating the eggs, these animals went from 250,000 animals to about 1,000 animals. But thankfully in 1970, a lot of conservation efforts were taking place, and now they're being cared for, and there's up to 19,000 animals, so that's a really good thing. Really happy to have these Galapagos tortoise here, but also let's talk about a different tortoise, which is that African Spur-Thighed tortoise we talked about. Now this animal is the largest mainland or inland tortoise. They live across Africa, just on the southern edge of the Sahara Desert, so very, very arid environment. And they get their name because they've got these conical spurs or on their thighs, on the back legs, but also these front legs you see here are very large scales on them. And those are helpful because these animals live in really hot areas, and they dig enormous burrows to get down to moisture, but also to escape the heat of the Saharan desert. And so they use these big, powerful legs to dig burrows that can be up to 10 feet deep.
Whoa. And
maybe even 20 to 30 feet long. And they'll get the moisture in that area, but also they can escape the heat of the day. So this animal is very similar, obviously, in its overall shape and form as the Galapagos tortoise. That carapace is made up of like keratin, just like your fingernail. And they continue to grow, and you might notice these forms on there. There's a lot of round areas, and those are called scutes. And they're kind of like bony plates that continue to grow. The number of scutes stays the same, they just get larger. And their shell, which is the carapace on top and the plaster on the bottom, is actually a part of their skeleton. It's attached to their spine and their rib cage, so it is a part of them. They can't escape it. They can't walk out of it like you might think. And so it is very important. But interestingly enough, just like you can feel pressure and sense things on top of your fingernail, if we touch their shell, they can feel that as well. So they have that, they're sensitive to that area. So if you pet a tortoise, they might like it. It's pretty cool.
So don't go knocking on a tortoise to see if they're
Don't
home.
knock on a tortoise shell, exactly. The African Spur-Thighed tortoise is the largest inland tortoise, but it only gets to be about maybe 30 inches in diameter and can weigh up to about 200 to 250 pounds, so a lot smaller, as opposed to the Galapagos tortoise, which is, they're called the gigantic tortoises, there are 3 species of those. The other one that most people might know are the Aldabra tortoises, which is the second largest tortoise, but they live on a volcanic island off the coast of Madagascar. So there's different area, but again, gigantic tortoise, and the Spur-Thighed tortoise is the largest inland tortoise. They don't live on islands.
Okay, now so you were talking about the scutes and how they each get bigger. So can you tell a tortoise's age by the scutes, kind of like,
like
rings
tree?
on a tree?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately not, because as those scutes grow, you can see the lines in them.
Yeah.
It does look like a tree, but because of wear and tear and erosion, they start to wear off. So you can't use them as an accurate way to measure them. So normally just the size and weight of the animal is a better way to kind of guess their age.
Now, do all of these tortoises get along, even though they're different species?
They can. They're pretty placid animals for the most part. They will get in some battles. I know that Galapagos tortoise will sometimes kind of use their necks. They'll kind of raise their necks up, and oftentimes the tortoise with the longest neck is the victor in a fight, so to speak, but they're not very aggressive in that matter. Well, we can look really closely here on the rear thighs of
the spurs.
You can see the spurs, those conical shaped spurs there, which is what they're named after. They don't know if that has a purpose, but they're certainly there, and oftentimes when an animal adapts something like that, there is a purpose. We just haven't figured it out yet. Very cool looking animals. Again, you can count, they have the number of scutes is particular to the species. They usually range in an average of 30 or so. And you can see the scales on the front of their legs as well, another part of their ability to dig, as I mentioned earlier.
They have cool looking mouths as well.
They do, and of course those mouths are designed to pull leaves and pull up grasses. They'll pretty much eat any vegetation they can because a lot of the places they live, there could be droughts and shortage of food. So tortoises are really good at storing food in their fat. And so they can go almost 6 months, and in worst case scenarios, up to a year without food and water. They store the water in their fat, and so as they start to metabolize that fat, they get water from it. You'll see the Spur-Thighed tortoises, they get all of their moisture from the plants that they eat, but also they're seen in the morning licking dew off of rocks to get water in.
Oh, wow.
The Galapagos tortoise, when water is available, they will drink really large volumes of water, almost more than 15% of their body weight. And they can store some of that water in their bladders and in their neck. And sailors actually found that out. So not only was the tortoise important as a food supply, they would use the oil and the fat for that means, but they could also get fresh water from the tortoise. So it was a good source of resources for them. Unfortunate for the tortoise because they weren't really concerned about conservation back in the 15th and 16th century.
What are these marks on the tops of their shell, the colored marks?
The colored marks are just a way for the animal care staff to tell them apart. Although they're very cute, they also look very much alike.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier to do a little marking that's going to stay there for a while so they can quickly identify the animal from a distance, but also if they're just kind of doing a count throughout the day.
Did any of these tortoises come to the zoo as babies, or were they born here?
They all came here as babies or were born here, and that's why these guys are so young. I remember when they first got here, they were very small, and you go, well, this animal is going to get up to 400 pounds. Well, yeah, in 100 years.
Right.
I'm not going to be here for that, but hopefully maybe the animal care staff in the future and the guests that come here in 50 years will see these guys, and they'll be, twice the size that they are right now.
Yeah. Well, that's really neat. Are there other large tortoises around the zoo?
These are the largest we have here.
Okay.
And so I think we have a couple also in the birds and reptiles habitat on the other side of the park. But during the summertime, they can come out here and enjoy the sun in this area, because in the winter they have to come inside. They're not meant for winter. They don't have that kind of insulation, and so we bring them inside for the cooler months of the year.
And can you remind us where you can find these particular tortoises?
Certainly. So we are currently standing in the habitat that is just north of the Pachyderm building, right, and just south of the Australia House, where our kangaroos and wallabies are, and of course our emus. So we're right there. You can come here and turn to your right and you see beautiful Galapagos tortoise. Turn to your left and you see hopping kangaroos and wallabies and even emus running around. So that's the best part about coming to the zoo, is the ability to see so much great wildlife in such great surroundings. It makes for a great day. And as usual, we're getting more and more open here at the zoo as the restrictions are brought down a little bit by our state, and we look forward to seeing everyone back here. It's been great talking to you about Galapagos tortoise and the African Spur-Thighed tortoise. Come out and see them, but of course all the other animals here at Brookfield Zoo. And again, we look forward to seeing you here again very soon.